What is skin but a medium to connect me to what is around me, and what is around me to me? What is my breath but a conversation between inhalation and exhalation? And what is movement but a coming together of body, brain, and space? Our senses may be complicit in the illusion of separation, but consciousness is shaped from the blurring of infinite connections. What we make makes us too. What we shape shapes us too. So the questions, my friend, I pose to you is how the city you live in lives in you. And how, as you draft your intent and craft its manifest, will you shape our image in this world and not the world in our image? Always on the move, but where are we going? We are busy, and it's showing. And yet, we can feel it, humanity slowing, an inertia that has seeped in as we have kept going. The choices we have made were not made in a vacuum. They came from a place of learning and wisdom. They came from a confidence of doing what is right. And therein lies our foundational fight. must we unlearn to be able to learn again? And how must our actions ripple out to form the voids for unlearning? It will be from these voids that we rebuild our places, the places where intents gather to shape and be shaped, the places where we rebuild our time and our space, cities that are conscious, learning and unlearning, defining and blurring, seeing and being, breathing again as living organisms do, changing and being changed, evolving, devolving, but always transforming. Knowing that a human city, a living city, does not strive for constancy. It strives for consciousness.
So I'm an architect by profession, working to bridge science, technology, and design. I directed and produced the video you just saw, and it was the opening to the 2020 Conscious Cities Festival, which is a festival of a movement which I founded, and it's still ongoing. There's plenty going on in India, so if anyone wants to engage with the movement, I suggest you go and seek out local chapters of the movement. So I'm especially excited to be in India because it's a place where the movement has really taken off, with chapters popping up all over the country. So you can find out more about Conscious Cities and Hume and my work online. But for now, it should suffice to say that much of my interest and efforts lie in the future of the built environments and the relationship we have with our surroundings. Today I'll be speaking about an aspect of the future of the design process, and what it means for everyone, designers, clients, and users. Hands up if you study design. How many designers are there here? Okay, a lot of designers. The ones that don't have their hands up made some good decisions along the way. So most of you will remember a similar situation to this. The 20 minutes you get to explain months of your work to a panel of critics and your fellow students. 20 years ago, I was met with this for the first time at my very first semester at architecture school. My drawings are up on the wall, the models are laid out, and it's my turn to present. Half of my class and 6 critics sit ready to listen as I begin to explain my process and ideas. It all made sense in my head, and there was a logic to how I could describe the project. The points were all written out in my notebook, and yet a minute into my presentation, I freeze. Words stop coming out of my mouth, and I struggle to regain my train of thought. I thought maybe they didn't notice. But that optimism was quickly wiped out by a friend who told me that I provided the class with the most awkward silence of the day. It wasn't an immediate realization, but over my studies, I understood that the hardest thing about working in design isn't necessarily imagining things up. It's knowing how to communicate them to others. That's what we continually learn, the language by which vision is transferred. I'd like to begin with a familiar story that's a metaphor for the link between communication, cooperation, and building. The story of the Tower of Babel, set in a time when all people spoke the same language. Enabled by the effectiveness of their communication, they planned to build a tower to reach the sky. The story goes that to prevent the completion of the tower, God confounds their speech, creating different languages in order to put a halt to their ability to cooperate. The necessity of effective communication sits at the heart of any process that requires more than one person. It's therefore not enough for a designer or architect to be able to imagine. Their ability to communicate ideas is just as important. So what is the language of the architect? Well, it's depended on their role in the process of building, and throughout history that role has shifted. It's been influenced by available technology, but also by processes of specialization that occur over time. In ancient Greece, where the word architect emerged, it referred to a master builder. And in Roman times, with a culture focused on large projects and civil and military innovation, the architect took on more engineering. In the Renaissance, the focus on intricate decor moved the field closer to the arts, with many Renaissance artists taking commission for building design. And since modern times, the architect has taken a double role. Firstly, as the purveyor of aesthetics and vision, but secondly, as a coordinator and administrator. Each role developed its own set of tools. And these tools, in turn, form the language by which architects communicate their ideas. The tools are a reflection of the role of the architect, moving towards the visual and away from the execution of designs. The assumption has been, up until a few months ago, that architects and designers will keep on updating their tools, but that these tools will continue to aid them in the same design tasks and processes. Is this still the expectation? Well, the thing about disruption is that it reroutes what's expected into completely different territory. Of course, I'm talking about OpenAI's ChatGPT and DALL-E 2. These have rocked almost every sector and have encroached much earlier than expected into the territory of the creative processes. On the visual side, graphic designers already have competition, as many potential clients can now create their own designs through DALL-E, and also other AI text-to-image engines. As this technology improves, it will undoubtedly take on many of the services that architects and designers provide and have been trained to do. How could it impact the creation of designs? In a recent article about a conversation with ChatGPT, the AI said, architects who choose to ignore AI will be left behind and ultimately forgotten as the industry evolves and advances. So what does it mean to not be left behind? When a designer has an idea, they use the language at their disposal to communicate it. Sketches, plans, 3D models, mood boards. And here's a simplified diagram of the traditional process, where a client communicates a need to a design professional, who hopefully listens. The architect or designer carries out a creative process, which they've been trained to do, and uses tools which they've learned to use to create a design. What new AI tools are doing are cutting out much of the process and connecting whoever is creating a design brief, directly to the final output. And so the question arises, who is going to work with AI? Will it be the client directly? Or will the designer reinvent themselves as the mediator between client and technology? And so what's happening is a shift in the evolution of the design process. The newest and most important tool is about to be words, how we articulate our imagination. Is this something we should be worried about? When I finished studying, I started working in an architecture practice, and to be honest, I was disappointed. We're trained in our studies to be creative, to invent, to think outside the box. Then we enter practice, and we end up spending hours doing and redoing plans, sections, details. It takes us weeks sometimes to produce an image that in our minds appear within seconds. Even more so, designers end up being the administrative arm of most projects, a secret no one tells you until it's too late. So we're so used to this that it's become our definition of the profession. And yet the idea of being emancipated from this toil is worrying people, because all change is initially met with suspicion. But I want to suggest we see things differently. And to do that, we need to look first at how things are, how we operate now, and ask ourselves if there's really a need to be so protective of the way we work. Our shared forms of communication are crucial for us to express intent. Even small differences can make huge changes. So our ability to articulate ourselves has a direct impact on the outcome of a project. So I wanted to see what happens when we're left to use only words to create. And I decided to let the genie out and give it a go. This was supposed to be a video. It was real life footage of me going to DALL-E. So you're met with oh, there it is. That's me letting out the genie. So I went to DALL-E, which is an AI text-to-image generator, and there it is. And soon you'll see the magic it does. So you're met with an empty text field and a generate button. And I began with a very simple phrase: an office for an advertising agency. The results are underwhelming, right? But not if you consider that it took only a few seconds to generate. And then I asked for a design that will enhance creativity and well-being. Given that it added elements such as color and natural materials, it must be that it's assuming that these are the right spatial qualities based on what the internet is presenting as spaces for creativity and well-being. But it's not enough to rely on the status quo, so I went into more detail in the next go. And given my knowledge and my experience in science-informed design and what it says about creativity and well-being, I added a few more descriptions in the brief. Things like variation within the space, areas for interaction, views, materiality, light, and the results were getting better, if we ignore the ones with the floors made of grass and gravel. This is all within a few minutes, so imagine what we could get by investing more time in how we articulate a brief. As you can see, to articulate a brief, you need to know what's important for the design. And here's a different kind of space, starting off with a simple brief, a classroom for 30 pupils, which unsurprisingly gives us the stuff of children's nightmares. But look at the jump in the design given a more detailed brief. And it can generate variations of a design within seconds. Think how long it would take for a designer to create this. So as I see it, tools like the one we've just seen, we've just tested out, are bridging the gap between imagination and production. They can cut back lengthy work processes, and imagine the difference between changing a few words instead of reworking all your drawings, or your models, your visualizations. By now you're probably wondering what you're looking at, so this is DALL-E's visual interpretation of that sentence, bridging the gap between imagination and production. What if you were met with this request at work? Imagine the amount of time, effort, headaches, miscalculations that a future AI could save us. Try to imagine carrying out this task yourself. So, in a world of infinite possibilities like words in a sentence, articulation is what's going to set design apart. And in architecture, articulating intent is often centered around the measurable. Architects refer to Neufert or the Metric Handbook for guidance on measurements, and they are understandably usually based on the relationship of our bodies to space. This is how we can relate to our shared world, through its physicality and through the objective measures that we can understand as universally as possible. And so systems of measurement have become the basis for the practical language of design as our means of expressing intent. And these measures, they're not just our common language, they profoundly shape the way we think and imagine. Because intuitively to us, if it's measurable, then it's buildable. And so the language of architecture gravitated towards the objectively describable. Einstein picked up on a problem that this creates. If how and what we measure both facilitates and limits the way we evaluate the world around us, do these measures truly reflect the importance of things? Given that we are so used to articulating design through measures, how will the future architect express themselves once AI takes on the more technical aspects of a design process? We can already see that, at least in the first generation text-to-image AI, the words we choose matter. And often, they are more descriptive rather than technical. Perhaps being forced to describe design intent will have a positive effect. After all, design choices affect everyone, not just the momentary experience, but also in the health and social outcomes of environments. The question is, what counts? And can we count it? Because What can be counted ends up shaping our environment. Whatever can be added to a design brief that we can evaluate as a measure of success tends to be the driver of design decisions. What can be counted becomes the engine for optimization and the evolution of design. Sometimes the changes are slow and gradual, but other times they are changes we can all perceive. We've seen the legroom of airplanes' seats shrink in front of our eyes over the years, slowly getting closer and closer, because the metric driving this change is number of passengers and profit. And this process affects everything. Our streets have had meaning engineered out of them for the sake of efficiency, the efficiency of movement, the efficiency of maintenance costs, and also at times to avoid people dwelling in them. In many cities, dwelling in streets is discouraged and frowned upon, barely supported by street design because it doesn't answer to the metric attached to it. But considering the types of metrics that shape our environments, we might find that focusing on human needs may well require creating a new lexicon. We're drawn to beauty and to the intangible vibe of a place. We can love spaces that by today's standards on paper would not be commissioned or approved. And we can hate being in places that fit every modern requirement made. We rarely articulate briefs with the language of experience because it seems to us an inexact form of communication. But then we also look on, dismayed at the state of everyday architecture. Why is it that we are drawn to places that inspire, that make us feel a sense of belonging, that bring awe and curiosity into our lives? But we rarely talk about aspiring to design for these same qualities. How do we normalize a new language for architecture that will not only improve our environment, but help us use future technology to society's benefit? This has been an essential question in my career, and much of my work has focused on creating that new language, a new set of measures. Research in psychology and neuroscience is creating new foundation to understand the human experience in space. And they're also giving us the tools to comprehend and measure things that have previously gone unmeasured in the building industry. We're adding new metrics, human metrics, that can quantify the hidden value of good design. These metrics can become the building blocks of a new language for architecture. Design is a decision-making process. And I'd like to quote one of my inspirations, Upali Nanda, who also narrated the film you watched, and say that every design decision is a hypothesis. So for every design decisions, we must be able to articulate a question. And ideally, the question we pose about the potential of architecture should be about the experience it creates and the effect it has on our lives. How can our architecture answer to our needs and aspirations? It's difficult to imagine how we can address so many needs at once, since we know that despite all the new technology and methods, we're talking about something incredibly complex. One way to start breaking down that complexity, at least how we work at Hume, is by using a simple tool. We do this through a user experience space formula that helps us create a thesis that's specific enough to probe scientifically. And by looking at the relationship of these three elements, we can articulate better what's important in a design. And this schema helps us break down each component in order to understand what's important for the human experience and how space can be designed more effectively for that experience. Human metrics can represent different effects, so behavioral, psychological, cognitive. And they can also relate to different scales and timeframes, such as looking at the effects of individuals all the way to societal shifts. And it may seem like a long time for scientific methods to reach industry, but there are a few good analogies to help us see what's coming. The green building movement has shown that demand can shape supply in architecture. And for many designers, a client's demand for BREEAM or LEED certification has very direct impact on the perceived value of their work. This is being followed up by new initiatives that are doing the same for well-being. So you take the Well-Building Institute, for example, that is one of many initiatives institutionalizing new knowledge about architecture and well-being. In the most competitive markets, developers who are interested in future-proofing their portfolio have realized that to keep their properties relevant, they now have to think more creatively about how to satisfy tenants and users. And we have a similar process occurring in the food industry. Our consumption habits are changing because both supply and demand are affected by cultural shifts. And when the invisible is made visible, our habits change, even if the process is slow. And when this same process is applied to the built environment, both demand and supply will shift. So with future tools, how do we learn to articulate future architecture? How will we know which words to prioritize over others? I don't have the answer. I'm really here to ask the questions that can help us prepare. But what I can say is learning a new language is probably, this new language, is probably the next big skill any designer will need to develop. And what I can also say for the near future, at the very least, is that human critical thinking is definitely still needed in this design process. Even with AI, our hands need to be firmly on the wheel. Because AI isn't coming out of nowhere, it's emerging from us and it's learning from us. And that's not necessarily always a good thing. In 2016, Microsoft brought into the world a tweeting AI called Itai, with the intent of being curious and to learn from her interactions with humans on Twitter. Here's one of her first tweets showing her intent to get to know and learn from humankind. Within 24 hours, sweet-natured Itai turned bigoted and hate-filled. Microsoft quickly pulled the plug, explaining that her responses are derived from her interactions with humans. A coordinated attack by a subset of people exploited a vulnerability in Itai. And this raises the question, what can AI understand about our design intent? Where is it drawing its information from? In the same way that you can't trust everything you read on the internet, we need to be equally suspicious of the knowledge presented without checks and balances. I know there are alternatives to ChatGPT. For example, AI21, they're citing the sources of the materials they provide. And that's a good step, and it's indicative of the skill set which will set some above others in the future of the design industry. How critically do we think about what is presented to us? But the main skill is communication and the quality of that communication. The very first thing we started off with. The very thing all designers learn to do. So let's not be scared of the future. Let's take a central skill we already have and refine it. It reminds me of this quote from Cedric Price. Of course, we have almost no choice but to adapt and use new technology. But what's important is to understand how we use it and what we're using it for. In the end, I think that this question that Cedric Price presents will be central to the future architect. Those who want to thrive will need to learn to mediate between clients and technology and harness these tools. I hope that this technological disruption will push architects and architecture to create a new, healthier, more creative language for the profession and the industry. I hope we'll choose the right words. In the end, technology or not, we're dealing with different ways to achieve the same thing, building intent. And because of that, the central role of the designer hasn't changed and will not change. Perhaps it will become even more pronounced. Architecture augments our abilities to achieve a state we wouldn't have been able to without. And that extended intent could be to serve a single person or a whole society. But mostly, once that intent has materialized into built form, it stays as is, intent frozen in time for us to engage with. It could be well-meaning or not, but if you start looking at the built world around you in terms of what message it projects, you will begin to see that you're surrounded by the materialization of intent. We would probably agree that designers, on the most part, go into the profession to make a positive impact in the world. But it doesn't always end up that way. Sometimes designers suffer from lacking the means to prove the value of their contribution, or by their inability of their clients to see it, or sadly, by some people's inability to put ego aside. But when designers use informed empathy to extend their intent to make a positive impact, the result is design that is intuitively loved and valued by others. Why am I using the word intent? Because we shape the world around us to achieve our intent. It's a way of extending out our existence and our values beyond ourselves. From the beginnings of architecture, when people moved out of caves and began to build in order to carry out their intent to survive and thrive, to our ability to support our own and others' efforts to overcome challenges, to avoid danger. We use architecture to separate, to claim things as our own, and to keep others away. But we also use it to welcome others and show warmth. We can use architecture to show others that they have been thought of and that they are wanted and included. This is a photo I took during protest in Tel Aviv, my hometown. It's at Rabin Square, in front of the local municipality building. I use this example because Rabin Square was designed with the intent to allow 40,000 people to gather in front of the building. You can see here the municipality building is also lit up in colors to show solidarity with the cause. In the day-to-day, Rabin Square can seem vast and empty, you saw in the video previously. But it's that emptiness which allows the voice of the city's people to fill it and be heard. The square empowers. In contrast, if you've ever visited Trafalgar Square in London, you'll have noticed two huge fountains that look like they were placed there as ornament. However, these two fountains were added to the square in 1845 in order for there to be less space for political protests, the opposite of Rabin Square. This is intent in disguise. Sometimes architecture clashes with our own desires, and we answer back by reshaping the world to our needs, despite what has been built. And always, in some form or another, our intent is in dialogue with the building's intent. So, as we stand at the opening of this new era with a lot of disruption ahead of us, I'd like to leave you with a question that spans any approach to changing our environment, low-tech or high-tech. How will you build positive intent into the world? Thank you.